Reason why relationships go from so hot to completely cold. It is a well-known fact that affection can wane during the course of a romantic relationship. At first, we feel warm and fuzzy toward one another, but as time goes on, our feelings change. We start putting our job first, we check our phones while they're talking, and we're not very interested in learning about how they spent their day. People naturally get weary of one another in the same way that they get bored with everything else, such as the device that previously appeared so fantastic or the movie that they used to enjoy, which is a popular explanation for this kind of emotional frost that can be found on the surface. This explanation is popular. In this tale, going cold is nothing more than the natural and inescapable result of becoming too familiar with something. However, there is another explanation that appears gloomy at first but ultimately offers greater cause for optimism. The decline in interest is neither inevitable nor due to any natural process. The boredom is something that is simultaneously more complicated and more active. It exists because we have been wounded by, angry with, or terrified of our partner, and we haven't found a cathartic method to tell ourselves, or them, about it. Consequently, we feel bored. Tuning out is not unavoidable, rather, it is a symptom of emotional suffering that is denied and a method of coping with that distress. We are completely numbed on the inside, not just a little bit bored. This may sound unusual because we may not have any active feeling that our partner has been hurting, angering, or frightening us. However, this does not mean that these emotions do not exist. The concept appears ridiculous or over the top. It makes our partners sound like monsters, and it makes us sound like weaklings, even when neither of those things is true. However, the normal, mature self that we know from other aspects of our lives is not the same as the person that loves within the context of a relationship. Even though most of us are quite resourceful and robust, the person we love is an incomparably more fragile individual. Image it as a smaller, younger, more defenseless version of ourselves that lives in our thoughts and is no tougher and not much wiser than we were as babies, which is when so many of our desires for love and conceptions about love were created. We should image it as if it were a version of ourselves that is younger, more defenseless, and lives in our heads. Even if we are 6 feet 2 inches tall with a bushy beard, this weaker version of ourselves will continue to guide our emotions. The loving self possesses an ego that is as thin as gossamer. It is extremely vulnerable to being injured, frightened, and distressed. You can cause it significant emotional discomfort by cutting it off in the middle of a story it is telling you about the sandwich it had for lunch, by not asking it sufficiently about the small spot that appeared on its arm the previous day, by choosing a book over cuddling, or by being a little tricky about which channel it should watch on television. These are, of course, insignificant slights when measured by the standards of an average adult, but love isn't measured under adult standards. These relatively harmless arrows are more than enough to pierce the fragile and emotional center of the self that loves. In a perfect world, of course, the little self would immediately call out what has taken place, it would calmly explain that it had been frustrated and upset, and the tone of its speech would be unoffensive and pleasant, but, the majority of the time it will just remain silent. It merely knows it's in pain, and it's driven by an impulse to withdraw and defend itself, which translates into behavior that seems rather numbed. This is something that can be forgiven. It doesn't really understand what's wrong with it, all it knows is that it's in agony. It is possible that if the adult self had to give voice to the loving self's upset, it would sound and feel absurd. This is one of the reasons why it does not happen. It is possible that having to say, "I don't feel you took enough interest in the details of my lunch break," can be particularly embarrassing for the one who has to say it. Alternately, you might say, "I'm 45 years old but I still can't figure out how to share a TV remote control." These are fairly insignificant concerns for an adult to obsess over, but the parts of ourselves that expose themselves as vulnerable because of love don't play by the rules that apply to adults in general. The loving self withers away, it loses the desire to have sex, it becomes cynical and irritated, and it has no idea why it behaves in this manner. This is the unintended consequence of the situation. It is not putting on a show, rather, it is bewildered. In order to acquire the ability to deal, it is necessary for us to have a significant mutual awareness and forgiveness of this dynamic of sensitivity and anguish, as well as a commitment to decode it in times of detachment and indifference. We need to establish a venue in which so-called inconsequential, love-sapping wounds can be safely spoken without fear of the other person brushing them off as insignificant or imagining the problems that are at stake, as is so often the case. When measured against the more rigorous expectations of the rest of life, the sensitivity of the loving self comes off as completely ludicrous, but this is not the rest of life. When we appear to have lost interest in our partners, we might just need an opportunity to imagine that we are secretly rather hurt and furious with them. We should have access to a safe forum in which our sensitive but critical feelings can be aired, purged, and understood without the risk of being humiliated. When we go cold, we might not actually have lost interest in our partners. Instead, we might just need an opportunity to imagine that we have. Thanks for watching.